They shoved the mop bucket toward her with enough force to slosh dirty water across the barracks floor, laughing as she bent to clean up their mess. Called her soft weak, a desk jockey playing dress-up in real soldiers' clothes. But when she rolled up her sleeves to wring out the mop, the senior drill instructor's coffee mug hit the concrete with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Because what he saw etched into her forearm wasn't some motivational quote or family tribute. It was 47 small tick marks, each one representing a confirmed kill, and beside them, the distinctive crosshairs of a sniper's scope. Want to know what happened when the commanding officer realized who was really standing in front of him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Meridian as recruits stumbled out of their bunks for another day of basic training. The Georgia heat was already building, promising another scorcher that would test every limit these young soldiers thought they had. Inside Barracks Charlie, the familiar chaos of military morning routine was in full swing. Boots stomped across worn linoleum, voices barked orders and complaints in equal measure, and somewhere in the back, a radio played country music that nobody really listened to, but everyone somehow knew the words to. Private Elena Vasquez moved through this chaos like water finding its path around stones. She was 34, older than most of the fresh-faced recruits by more than a decade, but she'd learned long ago that standing out was rarely worth the trouble it brought. Her movements were economical, practiced, the kind that came from years of making every motion count. She folded her gear with military precision, laced her boots with fingers that never fumbled, and arranged her bunk with the kind of attention to detail that made drill instructors look twice. But looking twice was dangerous in basic training, especially when you were already marked as different. Elena had been different from day one. Too old, too quiet, too composed when the drill instructors got in her face and screamed until spit flew. She never broke, never cracked, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her fold under pressure. Instead, she'd stand there with that calm, almost serene expression that made younger recruits think she was either incredibly brave or completely insane. The other recruits had noticed too. In the way that groups always notice the outlier, the one who doesn't quite fit the mold. They'd started calling her paper soldier somewhere around week 3, when she'd struggled with the obstacle course and finished dead last in the 2-mile run. The nickname stuck because it captured something they all felt, but couldn't articulate. She looked like a soldier, acted like a soldier, but something seemed fragile about her, like she might crumble under real pressure. Private Danny Morrison, 19 and fresh from a farm in Nebraska, had been one of the first to use the name. He wasn't cruel by nature, just young and looking for his place in the pecking order that every military unit develops. Elena never responded to the nickname, never showed anger or hurt, which somehow made it feel safer to use. She'd just nod politely when they called her paper soldier and continue whatever task she was working on. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane had been running basic training cycles for 8 years, long enough to recognize patterns and predict which recruits would wash out before they even knew it themselves. He'd seen thousands of young men and women come through his program, each one carrying their own story, their own reasons for choosing military service. Some were running from something, others running toward something, and a few were just running because they didn't know how to stand still. Elena Vasquez fell into none of these categories, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. She was competent, but not exceptional, determined but not driven, present, but somehow distant. Her file said she'd been a government contractor. Before enlisting, which explained the age but not the decision to start over at the bottom of the military hierarchy. Contractors made good money, had flexibility, got to go home at night. Basic training was for teenagers and career changers, not established professionals looking to take a massive step backward. The morning formation gathered in the pre-dawn. Darkness. 96 recruits arranged in perfect lines while Kane and his assistant drill instructors prepared to make their lives systematically miserable. This was week 6 of a 12-week program, the point where the initial shock had worn off but the real challenges hadn't begun. The point where recruits either found their strength or discovered they'd been fooling themselves about having any. Elena stood in the third row, her uniform crisp despite the humidity, her posture perfect despite the early hour. To her left, Private Jennifer Walsh whispered about weekend plans they wouldn't have. To her right, Morrison shifted nervously, already dreading whatever fresh hell the drill instructors had planned. But Elena remained still, her breathing controlled, her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that anticipation was often worse than reality, and reality was usually survivable if you didn't waste energy fighting things you couldn't control. Kane's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Today would be different. Today they'd be tested on more than just physical endurance or memorized procedures. Today they'd discover what happened when comfortable assumptions met uncomfortable realities. The barracks cleaning detail was supposed to be routine, almost boring. A chance for recruits to demonstrate attention to detail while the drill instructors evaluated their ability to work as a team under minimal supervision. The assignments were distributed with typical military efficiency. Morrison got the windows, Walsh got the floors, 3 others got the bathrooms, and Elena got the supply closet. It should have been simple, methodical, the kind of task that built character through repetition and pride through completion. Instead, it became the stage for something that would change how everyone in that barracks understood the difference between appearance and reality. The supply closet was a cramped space filled with cleaning supplies, extra linens, and the accumulated debris of dozens of training cycles. Elena approached it like she approached everything else, with quiet competence and systematic thoroughness. She sorted supplies by type, checked expiration dates on chemicals, and reorganized shelves with the kind of precision that suggested she'd done similar work before. Her movements were fluid, efficient, the kind that came from muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Private Marcus Chun, 22 and convinced he was destined for Special Forces, had been watching her work with growing irritation. There was something about Elena's calm competence that rubbed him wrong, like she was showing off by not showing off. He'd seen her struggle with physical training, seen her finish last in running drills, heard her called paper soldier by half the platoon. But here she was, organizing a supply closet like it was some kind of military operation. Chun had been having a rough week. Failed his first weapons maintenance test, got smoked by drill instructors for improper uniform presentation, and watched his bunkmate get selected for leadership training while he remained just another face in the crowd. He needed someone to take it out on, and Elena's quiet efficiency made her the perfect target. She wouldn't fight back, wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't do anything that might escalate the situation beyond what he could handle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The other recruits had gathered around, drawn by that magnetic pull of potential drama that made boring tasks temporarily interesting. Walsh stopped mopping to watch. Morrison abandoned his window cleaning. Even some of the recruits from other details drifted over, sensing that something was about to happen. The energy in the room shifted, becoming charged with anticipation and the kind of nervous excitement that preceded most military conflicts. Elena continued working, seemingly oblivious to the audience gathering behind her. She'd pulled down boxes of cleaning supplies, checking contents against inventory lists with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details mattered. Her movements remained calm, professional, like she was conducting a business meeting, rather than cleaning a storage closet under the watchful eyes of increasingly hostile recruits. Chun stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of authority he thought he'd earned through 6 weeks of training. "Paper soldier, you're doing It wrong. Elena looked up from her clipboard, her expression mild and attentive. What specifically needs correction? Her tone was professional, almost deferential, the kind that suggested she was genuinely interested in feedback rather than challenging his authority. But Chun had expected resistance, had prepared for an argument that would justify whatever came next. Her calm response threw him off balance, made him feel like he was attacking someone who wasn't fighting back. It should have been a warning, a sign that he was misreading the situation. Instead, it made him more determined to provoke. The reaction he wanted. "You're supposed to organize by usage frequency, not alphabetically," he said, making up regulations as he spoke. "High-use items at eye level, low-use items on bottom shelves. Basic supply management." Elena nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his feedback. "I was following the inventory system already in place, but if there's a specific protocol you'd prefer, I can adapt." The response was perfectly reasonable, professionally delivered, and completely infuriating to someone looking for a fight. Chun felt his face flush with the kind of anger that came from embarrassment, from realizing he'd picked a fight with someone who wouldn't give him the satisfaction of fighting back. The other recruits watched with growing interest, sensing that the dynamic was shifting in ways none of them fully understood. Walsh whispered to Morrison, "She's handling him perfectly." Morrison nodded, but something in Elena's composure made him uncomfortable. It wasn't the behavior of someone being bullied. It was the behavior of someone who dealt with much worse than angry recruits, and had learned that the best way to handle aggression was to let it exhaust itself against immovable calm. Chun tried again, his voice louder now, more aggressive. "You think you're better than us, paper soldier? Think because you're older, you know more than people who've been training longer?" Elena set down her clipboard and turned to face him fully, her posture relaxed but somehow more present. "I think we're all here to learn," she said simply. "And I think we all have different strengths to contribute." It was exactly the wrong thing to say to someone looking for a reason to escalate. Chun heard condescension in her calm tone, superiority in her composed response. He saw the other recruits watching, waiting to see if he'd back down or push forward. In his mind, this had become a test of his authority, his place in the social hierarchy that every military unit developed. Backing down now would mean losing face, losing respect, losing whatever small amount of power he'd managed to accumulate. The supply closet suddenly felt smaller, more cramped, as if the walls were closing in around the growing tension. Elena remained calm, her breathing steady, her hands relaxed at her sides. She'd seen this before, in different contexts with different people, but the pattern was always the same. Someone looking for a fight, someone who needed to prove something to themselves or others, someone who'd picked the wrong target, but couldn't back down without losing face. Chun's voice rose another level. "You want to contribute? Then start by admitting you don't belong here. Admit you're too old, too soft, too weak for real military service. Admit you're just playing soldier while the rest of us are preparing for actual combat." The words hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and spreading. Elena absorbed them without flinching, her expression unchanged, her posture still relaxed. But something had shifted in the room's energy. The other recruits sensed it too, that subtle change that preceded either resolution or explosion. Morrison took a step back, suddenly wanting distance from whatever was about to happen. Walsh found herself holding her breath, waiting for Elena to finally respond with the anger Chun was trying so hard to provoke. Instead, Elena picked up a mop bucket from the corner of the closet, began filling it with water and cleaning solution. Her movements were methodical, professional, like she was preparing for a routine task rather than responding to a verbal attack. "I understand you're frustrated," she said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of anger or hurt. "Basic training is difficult for everyone." Chun laughed, but it was a harsh sound without humor. "Frustrated? I'm not frustrated, paper. Soldier, I'm tired of pretending you belong here when everyone knows you don't. Tired of watching you struggle through physical training while acting like you're some kind of military expert. He gestured to the supply closet around them. This is about your speed. Organizing supplies, filing paperwork, staying safely behind the lines while real soldiers do the dangerous work. Elena continued preparing her cleaning station, her movements unhurried, despite the escalating verbal assault. She'd learned long ago that the best way to handle aggression was to let it exhaust itself, to remain calm until the other person either backed down or revealed their true nature. Most people, she'd discovered, were mostly noise. Their anger was performance, their threats were theater, their aggression was usually cover for insecurity or fear. But Chun was past the point of backing down. He'd committed to this confrontation. In front of an audience, had made it about more than just closet organization or military protocol. In his mind, this had become about respect, about hierarchy, about proving that age and composure didn't automatically translate to competence or authority. He needed Elena to break, to show weakness, to validate his assumption that she was exactly what he'd labeled her. You know what I think? Chun continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent barracks. I think you're hiding something. I think you're not who you pretend to be. I think you're exactly what we've been calling you, a paper soldier. Someone who looks good on paper, but folds under real pressure. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that would have made most people uncomfortable. Elena finished preparing her cleaning station and turned to face him, her expression still calm but somehow more focused. "And what would you like me to do about that?" she asked quietly. It wasn't a challenge or a threat, just a simple question. Asked in a tone that suggested genuine curiosity about his answer, Chun felt the moment slipping away from him. He'd expected anger, defensiveness, tears, anything that would justify his attack and validate his assumptions. Instead, he was getting the kind of professional courtesy that made him feel like a child throwing a tantrum. The other recruits were watching, waiting, and he could feel their attention shifting from supportive to uncomfortable. "Prove you belong here," he said finally, his voice carrying a note of desperation. "Prove you're not just some desk jockey playing dress-up. Prove you can handle real military work, not just organizing supplies and filing reports." Elena considered. This for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if she were working through the logistics of his request. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. Chun hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been focused on the confrontation, on breaking through. Her composure, on proving his point about her weakness. Now he was being asked to define what strength looked like, to specify what kind of proof would satisfy him. The silence stretched between them, filled with the tension of a moment that had gone too far to retreat from, but wasn't clear how to resolve. Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe we should just get back to cleaning," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Walsh nodded agreement, but she was watching Elena with growing curiosity. There was something about the older woman's composure that didn't match her reputation as paper soldier. Something that suggested depths nobody had bothered to explore. Chun's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He'd painted himself into a corner, demanded proof without defining what proof would look like. The other recruits were waiting, watching, and he could feel the moment slipping away from him. He needed to salvage something from this confrontation, needed to maintain the authority he'd claimed. "Fine," he said, his voice carrying the kind of finality that suggested he'd made a decision. "You want to prove you belong here? Clean this. Whole barracks, not just your assignment, all of it. Floors, windows, bathrooms, everything. Show us you can handle real work instead of just organizing supplies." Elena nodded as if he'd asked her to pass the salt rather than take on the work of 6 people. "That's a lot of work for one person," she said mildly. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Chun heard challenge in her calm tone, saw weakness in her reasonable question. "Yeah, that's what I want." Unless you're admitting you can't handle it. Elena rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms that were more muscular than anyone had noticed before. I can handle it, she said simply. And that's when Staff Sergeant Kane walked into the barracks for his routine inspection, his eyes immediately scanning the room for any signs of the kind of trouble that young soldiers inevitably created when left to their own devices. What he saw was 90% of his recruit detail standing in a circle around Elena Vasquez, who was preparing to clean the entire barracks by herself while they watched. The room fell silent with the kind of sudden quiet that meant someone had been caught doing something they shouldn't. Kane's expression didn't change, but his eyes tracked from face to face, reading the tension in the room like a map of recent events. He'd seen this before, the pack mentality that developed when soldiers decided someone didn't belong, the way groups would test individuals until they either proved themselves or broke under pressure. What's going on here? Kane's voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of managing situations exactly like this one. Chun stepped forward, his posture straightening as he tried to project confidence he didn't feel. Private Vasquez volunteered to handle additional cleaning duties, Staff Sergeant. We were just organizing work assignments. Kane's eyes moved to Elena, who was calmly arranging cleaning supplies with the kind of systematic efficiency that suggested she'd done this kind of work before. That right, Vasquez? Elena looked up from her supplies, her expression neutral and professional. I'm prepared to complete whatever tasks are assigned, Staff Sergeant. It was a perfect non-answer, neither confirming nor denying Chun's version of events while making it clear she wasn't going to create problems for anyone. Kane had heard responses like that before, from soldiers who'd learned to navigate difficult situations without making them worse. It was the kind of answer that came from experience, from understanding that sometimes the best way to handle unfair treatment was to outlast it. But Kane had also noticed something else, something that made him look at Elena more carefully. When she'd rolled up her sleeves, he'd caught a glimpse of ink on her forearms, dark marks that looked like they might be tattoos. Most recruits had tattoos, some tasteful, some not, most approved during the enlistment process. But Elena's markings looked different, more precise, more purposeful than typical civilian ink. Everyone else back to your assignments, Kane ordered, his voice carrying the kind of finality that ended discussions. Vasquez, you're with me. Elena set down her cleaning supplies and followed Kane toward his small office at the end of the Kia barracks, her movements calm and unhurried despite the scrutiny of every recruit in the room. Kane's office was a cramped space filled with filing cabinets, training manuals, and the accumulated paperwork of running a basic training program. He closed the door behind them and gestured for Elena to sit in the single chair across from his desk. Instead of sitting himself, he leaned against his desk and studied her with the kind of attention he usually reserved for recruits, who were either about to wash out or surprise him. You want to tell me what really happened out there? Kane asked, his voice less formal now, more conversational. Elena considered the question for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Private Chun felt I wasn't contributing adequately to the team, she said finally. He suggested I take on additional responsibilities to prove my commitment. Kane nodded slowly. He'd seen this pattern before, the way insecure soldiers would target anyone who seemed different, vulnerable, or outside the established pecking order. Elena was older, quieter, struggled with some physical training. She made an easy target for someone looking to establish dominance. But there was something about her response that didn't match the typical victim profile. And you agreed to clean the entire barracks by yourself? Kane asked. Elena's slight smile was the first emotion she'd shown all morning. I've cleaned worse places with less equipment, she said simply. Something in her tone made Kane look at her more carefully, his trained eye picking up details he'd missed before. The way she sat, perfectly upright but relaxed, suggested body awareness that came from extensive training. Her hands, when she wasn't holding cleaning supplies, rested in positions that would allow instant movement. Most tellingly, her eyes constantly tracked movement and exits, the kind of unconscious surveillance that came from spending time in dangerous places, where situational awareness meant survival. "Vasquez," Kane said slowly, "what did you do before? You enlisted?" Elena's expression didn't change, but Kane noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested he'd touched on something significant. "Government contractor," she said, which matched what was in her file. "What kind of contracting work?" Kane pressed. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the window that overlooked the training grounds where other recruit details were running morning drills. "Security consultation," she said finally. "Risk assessment. Problem solving." Each phrase was carefully chosen, revealing nothing while technically answering his question. Kane had been in the military long enough to recognize evasion when he heard it, but he'd also learned to read between the lines of official language. Security consultation could mean anything from mall security to diplomatic protection. Risk assessment could involve insurance investigations or combat zone analysis. Problem solving could mean management consulting or something much more specialized. "Must have been interesting work," Kane said neutrally. Elena's smile was brief but genuine. It had its moments. Kane pushed a little harder. "What made you decide to enlist? Big career change for someone with your background." Elena was quiet again, longer this time, as if she were deciding how much truth to reveal. "I got tired of working alone," she said finally. "Thought it might be time to be part of something bigger." Kane nodded, but he was still studying her face, looking for the tells that would reveal what she wasn't saying. There was something about her calm competence, her professional demeanor, her ability to handle harassment without breaking that. Suggested experience well beyond civilian contracting. "You seem comfortable with conflict," Kane observed. Elena's expression didn't change, but Kane noticed the way her posture shifted slightly, becoming more alert. "I've learned that most conflict is just miscommunication," she said. "And most miscommunication comes from people not understanding each other's backgrounds and capabilities." Kane felt a chill of recognition. That was exactly the kind of careful, diplomatic language that people used when they'd been trained to avoid revealing classified information. The kind of speech pattern that came from years of debriefings, operational security briefings, and conversations where saying the wrong thing could compromise missions or endanger lives. "Vasquez," Kane said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I need you to roll up your sleeves." Elena's expression didn't change, but Kane noticed the slight pause before she complied, the moment of calculation that suggested she was weighing options and consequences. When she pushed her sleeves up to her elbows, Kane felt his world shift. The markings on her forearms weren't decorative tattoos or military unit identifiers. They were tally marks, small and precise, arranged in groups of 5 with diagonal lines crossing each set. Kane counted quickly, his military training automatically cataloging what he was seeing. 47 marks total, each one representing something that required permanent documentation. But it was the other marking that made Kane's coffee cup slip from nerveless fingers to shatter on the concrete floor. Just below the tally marks, etched in black ink with military precision, was the unmistakable crosshair symbol of a sniper's scope. Below that, in smaller letters, coordinates that looked like they might reference specific locations or operations. Kane had seen similar markings before, in classified briefings about special operations personnel, in conversations with intelligence officers who couldn't officially discuss certain kinds of military contractors. He'd heard rumors about civilian snipers who worked in places and situations where uniformed military personnel couldn't officially operate. Ghost shooters who eliminated high-value targets in denied areas, who worked alone for months at a time, who accumulated kill counts that would make seasoned infantry soldiers uncomfortable. "Jesus Christ," Kane whispered, his voice barely audible in the small office. Elena calmly rolled her sleeves back down, her movements unhurried despite the dramatic shift in Kane's demeanor. "I prefer to keep my previous work experience private," she said quietly. "Some people find it distracting." Kane stared at her with new understanding, seeing past the quiet contractor persona to the professional who'd earned 47 confirmed kills in circumstances he couldn't even imagine. She wasn't paper soldier. She was someone who'd been hunting human beings in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, while the recruits harassing her were still in high school. "How long?" Kane asked, his voice hoarse with shock. Elena understood the question. 12 years, she said simply. "Started in Afghanistan, worked through Iraq, Syria, half a dozen other places that aren't officially documented." Kane nodded numbly, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd just learned. "And you're here because—" Kane trailed off, unable to finish the question. Elena's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of vulnerability he'd seen from her. "Because I got tired of killing people," she said quietly. "Thought it might be time to learn how to protect them instead." Kane felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He had a recruit detail that included teenagers fresh from high school, farm kids who'd never seen combat, college graduates who thought military service would look good on their resumes. And he had Elena Vasquez, a woman who'd spent over a decade as a professional killer, who'd accumulated more confirmed kills than most infantry units, who'd chosen to start over at the bottom of the military hierarchy because she wanted to find a different way to serve. "Does anyone else know?" Kane asked. Elena shook her head. "Classification levels above most people's clearance," she said. "My enlistment was processed through special channels. Official record shows government contractor, which is technically accurate." Kane nodded, understanding that he was now part of a very small group of people who knew the truth about Elena Vasquez. "What do you want me to do?" Kane asked, realizing that the power dynamic in his office had shifted completely. Elena was no longer just another recruit struggling through basic training. She was someone whose experience and capabilities far exceeded his own, someone who'd chosen to place herself under his authority despite having every reason to expect better treatment. "I want you to let me finish basic training," Elena said simply. "Let me learn how to be part of a team instead of working alone. Let me figure out how to use my skills for building instead of destroying." Kane nodded slowly, understanding that he was witnessing something rare and significant. A warrior choosing to become a protector, a killer learning to become a soldier. "And the others?" Kane asked, thinking about Chun and the recruits who'd been harassing her. Elena's slight smile was enigmatic. "They'll figure it out eventually," she said, "or they won't. Either way, I'll complete my training and find my place in the team." Kane realized he was looking at someone who'd survived 12 years of the most dangerous work imaginable, who'd learned patience and persistence in circumstances that would break most people. "You could have ended this differently," Kane said, thinking about what Elena could have done to Chun if she'd chosen to respond with violence instead of composure. Elena's expression grew serious. "I've ended too many things already," she said quietly. "I'm trying to learn how to build instead of destroy. How to be part of something instead of always working alone." Kane felt a profound respect for the woman sitting across from him, someone who'd walked away from a career that most people couldn't even imagine in order to find a different way to serve. She could have pulled rank, could have used her classified background to demand better treatment, could have handled her harassers with the kind of decisive action that had made her legendary in circles that didn't officially exist. Instead, she'd chosen to endure harassment, to clean barracks, to struggle through physical training with recruits half her age, all because she believed there was something valuable in learning to be part of a team. Kane realized he was looking at someone who embodied the best aspects of military service, someone who'd chosen the harder path because she believed it would make her a better person. "Vasquez," Kane said, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. "I think you're going to make an outstanding soldier." Elena's smile was genuine this time, transforming her face and revealing glimpses of the person she'd been before. 12 years of classified operations had taught her to hide her emotions behind professional composure. "I hope so, Staff Sergeant," she said. "I really hope so." Kane stood up, his mind already working through the implications of what he'd learned and how he'd handle the situation with Chun and the other recruits. He had a unique opportunity to turn this into a teaching moment, to help young soldiers understand that assumptions were dangerous and that everyone had stories worth respecting. But first, he had to get through the rest of the morning without revealing Elena's background while ensuring she received the treatment she deserved. It was going to be a delicate balance, requiring all his skills as a leader and instructor. Kane looked at Elena, seeing her with completely new eyes, understanding that his biggest challenge wouldn't be training her to be a soldier. His biggest challenge would be helping her learn to trust her fellow soldiers enough to let them see glimpses of who she really was underneath the careful composure she developed over 12 years of working alone in the world's most dangerous places. Kane opened his office door, ready to return to the barracks where Chun and the others were waiting for Elena to return with her cleaning supplies. But now Kane understood that they weren't just waiting for Paper Soldier to prove herself. They were waiting for one of the most dangerous people any of them would ever meet to decide whether they deserved to know the truth about who she really was. And Kane had a feeling that decision would change everything for his entire recruit detail. Kane walked back into the barracks with Elena beside him, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd just discovered. The recruits were scattered around the room, pretending to work on their cleaning assignments, while obviously waiting to see what would happen next. Chun stood near the supply closet, his posture defiant but his eyes uncertain, like someone who'd committed to a course of action but wasn't sure how it would end. The atmosphere in the barracks had shifted during Elena's absence. What had started as casual harassment had evolved into something more serious, more consequential. The other recruits sensed it too, that subtle change in energy that preceded either resolution or explosion. Morrison kept glancing between Elena and Chun, his expression increasingly uncomfortable. Walsh had stopped pretending to mop and was watching openly, her intuition telling her that whatever was about to happen would be significant. Elena moved toward the supply closet where her cleaning materials waited, her stride calm and purposeful. She gave no indication that anything had changed during her conversation with Kane, no sign that the dynamic had shifted in her favor. To the watching recruits, she looked exactly the same as before. Composed, professional, ready to take on whatever work had been assigned to her. But Kane was watching her with new eyes, seeing details he'd missed before. The way she moved through the room, her path automatically avoiding potential ambush points and keeping clear lines of sight to all exits. The unconscious way she cataloged every person's position and potential threat level. The fluid grace that came from years of moving through hostile environments where a single misstep could mean death. Chun stepped forward as Elena approached, his voice carrying forced authority. "About time, Paper Soldier. Your cleaning supplies are waiting. Hope you're ready to prove you can handle real work." Elena nodded politely, her expression unchanged. "I'm ready," she said simply, beginning to gather the materials she'd need for the expanded cleaning assignment. Kane positioned himself where he could observe everything without seeming to interfere. He decided to let this play out naturally, to see how Elena would handle the situation now that he knew who she really was. Part of him wanted to intervene, to put Chun in his place and end the harassment immediately. But another part was curious, to see how someone with Elena's background would manage a delicate social situation that required finesse rather than force. Elena began with the windows, spraying glass cleaner with systematic precision and wiping each pane with movements that were economical and efficient. Her technique was flawless, the kind that came from extensive practice, But the other recruits saw only an older woman doing menial labor. They didn't recognize the muscle memory of someone who'd spent countless hours maintaining equipment in field conditions, who'd learned that attention to detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Chun followed her progress with obvious satisfaction, pointing out spots she'd missed and suggesting improvements to her technique. "You're moving too fast," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd found his victim and intended to make the most of it. "Quality over speed, paper soldier. This isn't some office job where you can just go through the motions." Elena accepted his criticism without comment, adjusting her technique to match his suggestions. But Kane noticed something the other recruits missed. Elena's breathing remained completely steady, her heart rate apparently unchanged despite the verbal assault. Most people showed at least some physiological response to stress, but Elena displayed the kind of absolute calm that came from facing much more serious threats than an angry recruit. Morrison whispered to Walsh, "She's actually doing it. Cleaning the whole barracks by herself." Walsh nodded, but her expression was thoughtful rather than amused. "There's something about her," she said quietly. "The way she moves, the way she handles this. It's like she's done harder things before." Elena moved to the floors, filling a bucket with water and beginning to mop with the same systematic approach she'd used on the windows. Her strokes were even, overlapping slightly to ensure complete coverage, her pace steady and sustainable. She worked around the other recruits' feet without complaint, adjusting her pattern to accommodate their presence without asking them to move. Chun continued his commentary, his voice growing more confident as Elena failed to respond with anger or resistance. "See how she's moving? No urgency, no pride in her work. This is exactly what I was talking about. Going through the motions without understanding what real military standards look like." The other recruits were beginning to shift uncomfortably, sensing that something was off about the situation but unable to identify exactly what. Kane watched Elena work, noting details that revealed her true nature to anyone who knew how to look. The way she automatically secured her equipment when moving between tasks, never leaving tools or supplies where they could be used against her. The manner in which she positioned herself so that she could see every person in the room while appearing to focus on her work. The unconscious way she tested the weight and balance of each cleaning tool, assessing its potential as a weapon. Elena finished the floors and moved to the bathrooms, the least pleasant part of the assignment. Chun followed her, his voice taking on a note of genuine cruelty. "This is more your speed, paper soldier. Cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, staying safely away from anything that requires real courage or skill." Elena began scrubbing with the same methodical precision she'd shown everywhere else, her movements efficient and thorough. But Kane noticed something else. Elena's technique for cleaning the bathrooms was military precise, the kind that came from extensive experience in field sanitation under challenging conditions. She knew exactly how to work efficiently in cramped spaces, how to achieve maximum cleanliness with minimal resources, how to maintain her own safety while handling potentially hazardous materials. This wasn't the work of someone learning basic cleaning skills. This was the work of someone who'd maintained hygiene standards in places where failure could mean disease, infection, or worse. Private Rodriguez, who'd been quietly observing from across the room, approached Kane with a puzzled expression. "Staff Sergeant, something's not right about this. The way she's working, it's like she's done this before. Not just cleaning, but the whole situation. Like she's handled worse." Kane nodded slightly, his respect for Rodriguez's observation skills increasing. Elena moved through the barracks with systematic efficiency, tackling each cleaning task with the same calm competence. She organized supplies, mopped floors, cleaned windows, scrubbed bathrooms, and dusted surfaces with a level of skill that suggested extensive experience. But more than that, she worked with the kind of mental discipline that came from performing critical tasks under extreme pressure. Chun was running out of criticisms. Elena's work was flawless, her pace steady, her attitude professional. She'd handled everything he'd thrown at her without complaint, without breaking, without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her crack under pressure. His audience was beginning to drift away, losing interest in harassment that wasn't producing the dramatic results they'd expected. "This is boring," Morrison muttered, returning to his own cleaning assignment. "She's just doing the work, no big deal." Walsh nodded, but she continued watching Elena with growing curiosity. There was something about the older woman's composure that didn't match the paper soldier nickname, something that suggested depths none of them had bothered to explore. Kane decided it was time to intervene, not to protect Elena, but to create a teaching moment that might help his recruits understand the difference between appearance and reality. He approached Elena as she finished the last bathroom, her work area organized and efficient despite the accelerated timeline. "Outstanding work, Vasquez," Kane said, his voice carrying the kind of genuine approval that made recruits straighten with pride. "Professional, thorough, exactly what I expect from my soldiers." Elena nodded politely, beginning to pack up her cleaning supplies with the same systematic approach she'd used for everything else. Chun stepped forward, his expression confused and slightly desperate. "Staff Sergeant, I was just trying to make sure she understood proper standards, making sure she could handle real military work." Kane's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of steel. "And what did you learn from this exercise, Private Chun?" The question caught Chun off guard. He'd been focused on proving Elena's weakness, not on learning anything from the experience. "I learned that she can follow instructions when properly motivated," he said finally, his voice lacking conviction. Kane nodded slowly, his gaze moving around the room to include all the recruits who'd been watching. "Anyone else learn anything interesting?" Kane asked. Walsh raised her hand tentatively. "She worked like someone who'd done this before, Staff Sergeant. Not just cleaning, but the whole situation. Like she was used to handling difficult assignments." Kane nodded approvingly. "Good observation. Anyone else?" Rodriguez spoke up. "The way she moved, Staff Sergeant. Efficient, professional, like she'd been trained for this kind of work." Kane smiled slightly. "Excellent. Both of you noticed something important. What Private Vasquez demonstrated today wasn't just cleaning ability. It was professional competence under pressure, military bearing under difficult circumstances, the kind of discipline that comes from extensive training and experience." Elena continued packing her supplies, her expression neutral, but Kane noticed the slight relaxation in her posture. She was beginning to understand that the situation was shifting in her favor, that Kane was using this as an opportunity to educate rather than simply punish. "The thing about assumptions," Kane continued, his voice taking on the tone he used for important lessons, "is that they're dangerous. In military environments, when you assume someone is weak based on appearance, age, or performance in one area, you might miss their strengths in others. When you assume someone doesn't belong based on limited information, you might overlook valuable experience and capabilities." Chun's face was beginning to pale as he realized where this conversation was heading. The other recruits were paying attention now, sensing that Kane was building toward something significant. Elena had finished packing her supplies and was standing quietly, her posture relaxed but alert. "Private Chun," Kane said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "you made a lot of assumptions about Private Vasquez today. About her capabilities, her background, her right to be here. Based on what you observed over the last few hours, would you like to revise any of those assumptions?" Chun looked around the room, seeing Elena's flawless work, her professional composure, her calm competence in the face of harassment. He was beginning to realize that he'd badly misjudged the situation, that his assumptions about Paper Soldier might have been completely wrong. "I think maybe I misjudged her work ethic," Chun said carefully, his voice lacking the confidence he'd shown earlier. Kane nodded. What else? Chun was quiet for a moment, his mind working through the implications of what he'd witnessed. Maybe her experience level. She worked like someone who'd done this before. Kane nodded again. Anyone else want to share observations? Morrison raised his hand. The way she handled the pressure, Staff Sergeant. She never got angry, never complained, never asked for help. That takes discipline. Kane smiled, pleased with his recruits' growing awareness. Outstanding observations, all of you. Now let me share something that might help you understand what you witnessed today. Kane paused, choosing his words carefully. He couldn't reveal Elena's classified background, but he could provide context that would help his recruits understand the magnitude of their mistake. Private Vasquez is here by choice, Kane said slowly. She had other options, other opportunities, other ways to serve. She chose basic training because she wanted to learn how to be part of a team, how to work with people instead of alone. She chose to start at the bottom because she believed there was value in learning military fundamentals alongside people like you. Elena's expression didn't change, but Kane noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested he was touching on something significant. The recruits were listening intently, beginning to understand that there was more to this story than they'd realized. When you called her paper soldier, when you questioned her right to be here, when you made her clean the entire barracks to prove herself, you weren't just harassing a struggling recruit. You were disrespecting someone who chose to place herself under your authority despite having every reason to expect better treatment. Chun's face was pale now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Staff Sergeant, I didn't know. I thought she was just another recruit having trouble with training. Kane nodded grimly. That's exactly the problem, Private Chen. You thought you knew without taking the time to learn. You assumed weakness where you should have looked for strength. Kane turned to address the entire room. This is a lesson all of you need to learn. In military environments, assumptions can get people killed. When you assume someone is weak, you might miss their capabilities. When you assume someone doesn't belong, you might overlook their experience. When you assume you understand someone's story based on limited information, you might make enemies of people who should be allies. Elena stepped forward, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the room. Staff Sergeant, if I may. Kane nodded, curious to see how she would handle this moment. Elena looked around the room, her gaze settling on each recruit in turn. I don't blame anyone for making assumptions, she said simply. I know I don't fit the typical recruit profile. I know I struggle with some aspects of training. I know. It's natural to wonder why someone my age would choose to start over at the bottom of the military hierarchy. She paused, her expression thoughtful. But I also know that everyone has stories, experiences, capabilities that aren't immediately obvious. I know that the military works best when people look out for each other instead of looking for weaknesses to exploit. I know that teams are stronger when they're built on respect and understanding rather than assumptions and harassment. Chun stepped forward, his voice subdued. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, wrong about what you could handle, wrong about why you're here. I let my own frustrations get in the way of treating you with the respect you deserve. Elena nodded graciously, her expression kind but professional. Apology accepted, Private Chun. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Chun nodded, but Kane could see the young soldier was still processing the magnitude of his error. The other recruits were watching this exchange with growing awareness of their own roles in the harassment. Morrison stepped forward next. Ma'am, I should have spoken up when things got out of hand. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't want to get involved. That was wrong of me. Elena's smile was genuine. Speaking up in difficult situations takes courage, Private Morrison. It's a skill that develops with experience and confidence. Walsh approached, her expression thoughtful. Ma'am, I'm curious about your background. You work like someone who's done this before, who's faced harder challenges. Would you be willing to share some of your experiences? Elena's expression grew more guarded, but not unfriendly. Some experiences are better left private, she said carefully. But I can tell you that I've learned the value of persistence, of maintaining professional standards under pressure, of working as part of a team even when it's difficult. Kane watched this exchange with growing respect for Elena's ability to provide meaningful guidance without revealing classified information. Rodriguez raised his hand. Ma'am, what advice would you give to someone who wants to develop that kind of discipline? The way you handled today, staying calm under pressure, maintaining standards even when people were treating you unfairly? Elena considered the question carefully. Practice doing the right thing even when it's hard, she said finally. Practice maintaining your standards even when others don't. Practice treating people with respect even when they haven't earned it. Those habits become automatic over time, and they'll serve you well in military environments where pressure and unfairness are common. Kane realized he was witnessing something remarkable. Elena was using this difficult experience as a teaching opportunity, helping young soldiers understand principles that would serve them throughout their careers. She was demonstrating leadership through example, showing grace under pressure, and modeling the kind of professional behavior that made military organizations effective. Outstanding advice, Private Vasquez, Kane said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. I think we've all learned something valuable today about assumptions, respect, and professional behavior under pressure. He looked around the room at his recruits, seeing new awareness in their expressions. From now on, I want all of you to remember what you witnessed today. Remember that everyone has stories, experiences, capabilities that aren't immediately obvious. Remember that the military works best when people support each other instead of tearing each other down. Remember that respect is earned through professional behavior, not through harassment or intimidation. Elena began gathering her cleaning supplies, her movements efficient and purposeful. But Kane noticed something different about her posture. Now, she seemed more relaxed, more open, as if the experience had helped her understand that not all military environments were hostile to someone with her background. Chun approached Elena as she packed up her equipment. Ma'am, is there anything I can do to make up for my behavior today? Any way I can help with future assignments? Elena looked up from her supplies, her expression thoughtful. The best way to make up for today is to treat future teammates with the respect they deserve from the beginning, she said simply. Look for strengths instead of weaknesses. Ask questions instead of making assumptions. Build people up instead of tearing them down. Chun nodded, his expression serious. I understand, ma'am. I'll do better. Elena smiled, the first truly warm expression she'd shown since the harassment began. I believe you will, Private Chun. We all learn from our mistakes. What matters is growing from the experience. Kane watched this exchange with growing understanding of Elena's character. She could have held grudges, could have demanded more substantial apologies, could have used her superior experience to humiliate Chun the way he'd tried to humiliate her. Instead, she was choosing to be gracious, to focus on education rather than punishment, to use the experience as a foundation for better relationships moving forward. All right, everyone, Kane announced, his voice carrying the authority that ended discussions. Back to your original assignments. I want this barracks squared away according to regulation standards. Move with purpose. The recruits scattered to their various tasks, but Kane noticed the change in atmosphere. The hostility was gone, replaced by something more respectful, more professional. Elena finished packing her supplies and approached Kane. Staff Sergeant, if there's nothing else, I'd like to return to my regular training schedule. Kane nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. Actually, Private Vasquez, I'd like to discuss some additional training opportunities with you. Based on what I observed today, You might be ready for more challenging assignments." Elena's expression showed interest but also caution. "What kind of opportunities, Staff Sergeant?" Kane smiled. "Leadership training, advanced courses, specialized instruction. Your performance today demonstrated capabilities that could benefit the entire unit. I'd like to explore ways to utilize your experience more effectively." Elena considered this carefully. "I appreciate the offer, Staff Sergeant, but I want to complete basic training alongside my fellow recruits. I want to earn my place in the team through the same process as everyone else." Kane nodded, understanding that Elena was still focused on her original goal of learning to work as part of a team. "I respect that decision," Kane said. "But I also want you to know that when you're ready for additional challenges, the opportunities will be available. Your experience and capabilities are valuable assets that shouldn't be wasted." Elena smiled, her expression showing genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I'll keep that in mind as I continue my training." Kane nodded, watching as Elena walked back to her bunk to prepare for the next phase of the training day. He realized he'd witnessed something significant, not just in terms of conflict resolution, but in terms of leadership development. Elena had handled a difficult situation with grace, professionalism, and wisdom. She'd turned harassment into education, conflict into understanding, assumptions into respect. She demonstrated the kind of leadership that inspired rather than intimidated, that built teams rather than destroying them. As the day progressed, Kane noticed changes in the barracks dynamic. The recruits were more respectful to each other, more willing to help struggling teammates, more focused on collective success rather than individual advantage. Elena's example had created a ripple effect that was improving the entire unit's performance. During afternoon training, Kane observed Elena working with other recruits, offering quiet assistance and encouragement. She helped Morrison with equipment, maintenance, provided technique suggestions to Walsh during weapons training, and worked with Chun on physical fitness routines. Her approach was always supportive, never condescending, focused on building capabilities rather than highlighting deficiencies. Kane realized that Elena was naturally becoming a leader within the recruit group, not through assertion or dominance, but through competence and character. The other recruits were beginning to seek her guidance, to value her opinions, to see her as someone worth emulating rather than harassing. By evening, the transformation was complete. Elena was no longer paper soldier, the weak recruit who didn't belong. She was becoming the kind of soldier that others looked up to, someone whose experience and wisdom made the entire unit stronger. Kane understood that his biggest challenge wouldn't be training Elena to be a soldier. His biggest challenge would be helping her understand that she already was everything the military needed her to be. As the recruits prepared for lights out, Kane reflected on the day's events. A situation that had started with harassment and assumptions had evolved into a profound lesson about respect, leadership, and the hidden strengths that people carry. Elena had turned a moment of potential crisis into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd witnessed her response. Kane looked at Elena's file one more time, seeing it with completely new understanding. The woman who'd cleaned the barracks without complaint, who'd handled harassment with grace, who'd turned conflict into education, wasn't just a recruit struggling through basic training. She was a professional warrior who'd chosen to start over, to learn new ways of serving, to find her place in a team rather than working alone. And Kane realized that his job wasn't to train Elena. His job was to help her teach others what she'd already learned about discipline, professionalism, and the kind of quiet leadership that made military organizations truly effective. The paper soldier nickname would fade into memory, replaced by the respect and admiration that Elena had earned through her actions rather than her words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new chances for the recruits to learn from Elena's example. But tonight, Kane was satisfied that his unit had learned something valuable about the difference between appearance and reality, about the importance of respect and understanding, about the hidden strengths that people carry when they're given the chance to reveal them. Elena had proven that she belonged not by meeting their expectations, but by exceeding them in ways they'd never imagined possible. And in doing so, she'd transformed not just her own reputation, but the entire culture of the unit she'd chosen to join. 3 months later, Elena stood at the edge of the rappelling tower, her hands steady on the rope despite the 40-foot drop below. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly, but her breathing remained controlled, professional. Around her, younger recruits shifted nervously, some hiding their fear better than others. Morrison wiped sweat from his palms. Walsh checked her equipment for the 3rd time. Chun focused on his breathing, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. But Elena's composure was different from manufactured bravado. It was the calm that came from facing genuinely life-threatening situations, from working in environments where a single mistake meant permanent consequences. Kane watched from the ground, noting how naturally the other recruits had begun to position themselves near Elena, drawing strength from her presence without fully understanding why. "Remember your training," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the recruits closest to her. "Trust your equipment, control your descent, focus on technique rather than speed." Her tone was instructional without being patronizing, supportive without being condescending. Rodriguez nodded, his grip on the rope relaxing slightly. Kane observed this interaction with growing appreciation for Elena's natural leadership abilities. She'd never demanded authority, never asserted superiority, never used her experience to intimidate or dominate. Instead, she'd earned respect through consistent competence, quiet support, and unwavering professionalism. The other recruits had gradually begun seeking her guidance, valuing her opinions, looking to her for reassurance during challenging training exercises. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks following the barracks incident, Elena had continued to struggle with certain aspects of physical training. Her run times remained slower than average, her obstacle course performance was adequate but not exceptional, and she sometimes required extra coaching on equipment she'd never used before. But her attitude remained positive, her effort constant, her willingness to help others unlimited. Chun had become one of her strongest supporters, his earlier harassment transformed into genuine admiration. He'd watched Elena fail at tasks, then return the next day to try again with the same quiet determination. He'd seen her help struggling recruits without being asked, offer encouragement without seeking recognition, maintain standards even when others cut corners. His respect for her had grown into something approaching reverence. "Vasquez, you're up," called Sergeant Palmer, the tower instructor. Elena stepped to the edge, her movements fluid and confident. She'd done this before, in different circumstances, with different equipment, but the principles remained the same. Control the descent, trust the rope, land safely. She clipped into the belay system with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the safety checks with muscle memory that spoke of extensive experience. The watching recruits held their breath as Elena stepped backward off the platform, her body positioning perfect, her descent controlled and steady. She touched down at the base of the tower with barely a sound, her knees absorbing the impact automatically. Palmer nodded approvingly, his expression showing the kind of professional recognition that came from watching someone who truly understood the fundamentals. "Outstanding technique, Vasquez," Palmer called out. "Clean execution, perfect form. That's how it's done." Elena acknowledged the praise with a brief nod, then moved to the equipment staging area to help prep her gear for the next group. But Kane noticed something else in her movements. A subtle shift that suggested she was finally becoming comfortable with receiving recognition for her abilities. Walsh rappelled next, her descent slightly faster than Elena's but equally controlled. She'd been working closely with Elena on technical skills, learning to approach challenges with methodical preparation rather than anxious energy. Her improvement over the past few weeks had been remarkable, not just in physical performance, but in mental approach to difficult tasks. Morrison followed, his technique solid if not spectacular. He'd become Elena's unofficial student, seeking her advice on everything from equipment maintenance to physical fitness routines. His respect for her had grown into genuine affection, the kind of mentor-student relationship that formed the backbone of effective military units. Chun rappelled with obvious confidence, his earlier arrogance replaced by quiet competence. He'd learned to channel his competitive nature into supporting his teammates rather than dominating them. His technique was good, his attitude better. His relationship with Elena transformed from antagonistic to deeply respectful. One by one, the recruits completed their descents, each one demonstrating skills that had been developing over weeks of training. But more than technical proficiency, they showed the kind of mutual support and collective confidence that characterized truly effective teams. Elena's influence had spread through the entire unit, creating a culture of excellence that lifted everyone's performance. As the exercise concluded, Kane gathered the recruits for debriefing. "Outstanding work today," he said, his voice carrying genuine approval. "I'm seeing the kind of teamwork and individual excellence that makes military units effective. You're supporting each other, learning from each other, holding each other to high standards. That's what military service is really about." Elena listened to this feedback with quiet satisfaction, understanding that she'd finally achieved what she'd come to basic training to find. She was part of a team, contributing to collective success rather than working alone. The isolation that had defined her previous career was being replaced by the kind of mutual support and shared purpose that made military service meaningful. After the training exercise, Kane approached Elena privately. "How are you feeling about your progress?" he asked. Elena considered the question carefully, her expression thoughtful. "I'm learning what I came here to learn," she said finally. "How to trust other people, how to be part of something bigger than myself, how to use my experience to build rather than destroy." Kane nodded, understanding that Elena's journey through basic training had been about much more than learning military skills. It had been about transformation, about finding new ways to serve, about discovering that her capabilities could be used to strengthen teams rather than eliminate targets. The change in her demeanor over the past few months had been subtle but significant. "Your influence on the other recruits has been remarkable," Kane said. "They look up to you, learn from you, draw strength from your example. You've become the kind of leader that makes entire units more effective." Elena's smile was genuine, showing the satisfaction that came from meaningful contribution to something larger than herself. "They've taught me as much as I've taught them," she said. "About trust, about collaboration, about the value of working toward shared goals. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a team." Kane realized he was witnessing the completion of a remarkable transformation, not just in Elena's role within the unit, but in her understanding of her own identity and purpose. That evening, as the recruits prepared for their final week of basic training, Chun approached Elena during equipment maintenance. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught us over these past few months. Not just the technical stuff, but the way you've shown us how to handle pressure, how to support each other, how to maintain standards even when things get difficult." Elena looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her expression warm but professional. "You've all taught me valuable lessons too, Private Chun, about the importance of second chances, about the value of working with people instead of alone, about finding new ways to serve." Chun nodded, his expression serious. "I know I made some bad assumptions about you early on," he said. I judged you based on limited information and nearly missed the opportunity to learn from someone with your experience and character. I won't make that mistake again. Elena's smile was encouraging, showing the kind of grace that transformed past conflicts into future strength. We all make mistakes, she said simply. What matters is learning from them and growing into better versions of ourselves. You've done that, and I'm proud of the soldier you've become. Chun straightened unconsciously, his posture reflecting the confidence that came from earning respect through genuine change and growth. Morrison joined the conversation, his equipment maintenance nearly complete. Ma'am, what's next for you after graduation? Are you planning to stay in the military, or will you return to civilian contracting? Elena's expression grew thoughtful, as if she'd been wrestling with this question for some time. I'm planning to stay in the military, she said finally. I've found something here that I didn't have in my previous work. Purpose, community, the chance to use my skills to build rather than destroy. I want to see how far I can take that. Morrison nodded, his expression showing genuine happiness for her decision. Walsh approached with her own equipment, joining the informal gathering that had formed around Elena. Ma'am, whatever you decide to do, I hope we get the chance to serve together again. You've shown us what real leadership looks like, and I'd be honored to continue learning from your example. Elena's expression showed genuine affection for the young soldier. The feeling is mutual, she said warmly. You've all exceeded my expectations in every way. You've shown me that military service can be about more than just individual excellence. It can be about collective achievement, mutual support, shared purpose. The recruits around her smiled, understanding that they'd all been part of something meaningful. As the evening progressed, Kane observed the informal gathering around Elena with growing satisfaction. She'd become the natural center of the unit, not through assertion or dominance, but through competence and character. The other recruits sought her guidance, valued her opinions, drew strength from her presence. She'd achieved exactly what she'd come to basic training to find. The next morning brought the final week of training, with its culminating exercises and formal evaluation. Elena approached these challenges with the same quiet competence she'd shown throughout the program. But now she was supported by teammates who trusted her judgment and valued her contribution. The isolation that had defined her previous career was completely gone, replaced by the kind of mutual support that made military service fulfilling. During the final field exercise, Elena's leadership abilities were on full display. She coordinated team movements with subtle efficiency, provided tactical guidance without overstepping her role as a fellow recruit, and maintained unit cohesion during challenging scenarios. Her experience was evident in every decision, but she applied it in ways that strengthened the entire team rather than highlighting her individual capabilities. Kane watched this performance with profound respect, understanding that he was witnessing the emergence of a natural leader who could inspire excellence in others through example rather than command. Elena had found her place in the military hierarchy not by demanding recognition, but by earning it through consistent contribution to collective success. Chun performed exceptionally during the field exercise, his earlier arrogance replaced by quiet confidence and genuine concern for his teammates. He'd learned to channel his competitive nature into supporting others, to seek excellence through collaboration rather than domination. His transformation had been as remarkable as Elena's, though in different ways. Morrison showed steady improvement throughout the exercise, his technique solid and his attitude positive. He'd developed the kind of quiet competence that made him a valuable team member, someone who could be relied upon to handle assigned tasks while supporting others when needed. His respect for Elena had grown into genuine friendship, the kind that would last throughout their military careers. Walsh demonstrated natural leadership potential, her ability to remain calm under pressure and coordinate complex tasks, suggesting future opportunities for advancement. She'd learned from Elena's example that leadership was about service rather than authority, about building others up rather than tearing them down. Rodriguez showed exceptional promise, his tactical thinking and situational awareness suggesting aptitude for specialized training. He'd absorbed lessons from Elena about the importance of preparation, attention to detail, and maintaining standards even under pressure. His development had been steady and impressive. As the field exercise concluded, Kane gathered the recruits for final evaluation. "Outstanding performance," he said, his voice carrying genuine pride in their accomplishments. "You've demonstrated the kind of individual excellence and team cohesion that makes military units effective. You've learned to support each other, to learn from each other, to hold each other to high standards." Elena listened to this feedback with quiet satisfaction, understanding that she'd achieved her goals for basic training. She'd learned to work as part of a team, to trust others with important responsibilities, to use her experience to build rather than destroy. The transformation had been gradual but profound, changing not just her role within the unit, but her understanding of her own identity and purpose. Graduation day arrived with typical military ceremony, formal presentations, and family gatherings. Elena stood with her fellow recruits, her uniform crisp and her bearing proud. She'd completed the same training as everyone else, met the same standards, earned the same recognition. But more than that, she'd found her place in the military community, discovered new ways to serve, and learned to trust others with the kind of profound responsibility that made teams truly effective. Kane approached Elena after the ceremony, his expression showing deep respect for what she'd accomplished. "Congratulations, Private Vasquez. You've exceeded every expectation, not just for individual performance, but for contribution to unit effectiveness. You've shown what it means to be a soldier in the truest sense." Elena smiled, her expression showing genuine fulfillment. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. This has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I came here to learn about teamwork, and I've discovered something I didn't know I was missing." Kane nodded, understanding that Elena's journey through basic training had been about much more than military skills. "What's next for you?" Kane asked. Elena's expression grew thoughtful, as if she'd been considering this question for some time. "I'm hoping for assignment to a unit where I can continue learning about leadership, about building teams, about using my experience to make others more effective. I want to keep growing as a soldier and as a person." Kane smiled, knowing that Elena's future in the military was bright. "I think you'll find plenty of opportunities for that kind of growth. Your combination of experience, character, and leadership ability is exactly what the military needs. You're going to make a significant contribution wherever you're assigned." As the graduation ceremony concluded, the recruits began saying their goodbyes, exchanging contact information and making plans to stay in touch. Elena found herself surrounded by teammates who'd become genuine friends, people who valued her contribution and respected her character. The isolation that had defined her previous career was completely gone, replaced by the kind of meaningful relationships that made military service fulfilling. Chun approached Elena with obvious emotion, his earlier antagonism transformed into deep respect and affection. "Ma'am, I can't thank you enough for everything you've taught me. About leadership, about character, about the importance of treating people with respect. I'm going to carry those lessons throughout my career." Elena's smile was warm, showing genuine pride in his transformation. "You've grown into an exceptional soldier," she said. "I'm proud of the person you've become and confident in your future success. Remember that leadership is about service, not authority. Use your capabilities to lift others up, not to tear them down." Chun nodded, his expression serious as he absorbed this final piece of guidance. Morrison stepped forward next, his expression showing genuine affection for the woman who'd become his mentor. "Ma'am, I hope we get the chance to serve together again. You've shown me what it means to be a professional soldier, and I want to continue learning from your example." Elena's expression showed mutual respect and friendship. "The feeling is mutual," she said warmly. "You've shown remarkable growth and development. Continue to approach challenges with the same methodical preparation and positive attitude. You're going to have a successful career." Morrison smiled, understanding that Elena's confidence in him was based on careful observation of his abilities and character. Walsh approached with obvious emotion, her respect for Elena having grown into genuine admiration. "Ma'am, you've changed how I think about leadership, about service, about what it means to be part of something bigger than myself. Thank you for showing us that strength comes from supporting others, not from dominating them." Elena's expression showed pride in Walsh's development. "You have natural leadership ability," Elena said. "Use it to build teams, to develop others, to create the kind of environment where everyone can excel. The military needs leaders who understand that true strength comes from collective achievement, not individual dominance." Walsh nodded, understanding that she'd received valuable guidance about her future development. As the day concluded, Elena reflected on her journey through basic training. She'd arrived as someone fleeing a career that had become emotionally unsustainable, someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be part of a team. She was leaving as someone who'd rediscovered the value of collaboration, who'd learned to trust others with important responsibilities, who'd found new ways to use her experience for positive purposes. The paper soldier nickname had faded into memory, replaced by genuine respect and admiration from teammates who'd learned to value her contributions. Elena had proven that transformation was possible, that people could change their fundamental approach to work and relationships, that experience could be channeled into building rather than destroying. Kane watched Elena leave with her fellow graduates, understanding that he'd witnessed something remarkable. A professional warrior had chosen to become a professional soldier, trading isolation for teamwork, individual achievement for collective success, destruction for construction. The transformation had been gradual but profound, changing not just Elena's role but her entire understanding of purpose and identity. As the base returned to normal operations, Kane reflected on the lessons learned during Elena's time in basic training, about the danger of assumptions, about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, about the value of giving people opportunities to prove themselves. Elena had taught his entire unit about respect, about character, about the kind of quiet leadership that made military organizations truly effective. The story of Elena Vasquez would be told for years to come, not as a cautionary tale about underestimating people, but as an inspiring example of transformation and growth. She'd shown that people could change, that assumptions could be wrong, that strength came in many forms. Most importantly, she demonstrated that the military could be a place where people found new purposes, developed new capabilities, and discovered new ways to serve. Elena's journey from paper soldier to respected teammate had been about more than proving her capabilities. It had been about finding her place in a community, learning to trust others, and discovering that her experience could be used to build rather than destroy. The 47 marks on her wrist would always remind her of her past, but they no longer defined her future. She'd found something worth more than individual recognition or professional success. She'd found belonging, purpose, and the satisfaction that came from contributing to something larger than herself. The isolated sniper had become a valued team member, the lone wolf had joined a pack, and the destroyer had learned to build. In the end, that transformation was worth more than any medal or commendation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.